All right. Good morning, Chase Oaks. Good to see everybody. And that's true for those at Legacy as well as our Sloan Creek campus. You're getting really close, being your new building, exciting up there. Our 544 campus, too, in Wiley. For those of you who are watching online right now, including my homies from Alabama, glad to have you, and podcasters, all kinds of people. So now today we're continuing this series called Simplify, where we're taking some time to kind of step back and really evaluate our life, because it is so easy in this culture to run so fast and fill our life with so many things. I mean, most of them really good things that we may not even realize there are more important things that we're missing. As Jesus talked about with his friend Martha that we looked at in the first week of this series, where he says, Martha, you're concerned and you're worried about so many things. But in this moment, there was only one thing that was really worth worrying about, and you missed it. And we don't want to worry, we don't want to miss the one things. And so we're going to be looking at that. Last week, we got really practical of the discipline of living this way. And if you missed last week, I'd encourage you to watch it, because it's just really practical and helpful that way. We even had homework. Did you do your homework? Really? I'm glad. Thanks, both of you, for doing that. That's encouraging. And if you didn't do it, you can still turn it in next week, all right? So you still got, but I have to take off 10 points to be fair to the two people who did it, early or on time, actually. And today we're making a little transition from the principle to now applying the principle to different areas of life. So we'll look at different areas of life and say, okay, what's the one thing we want to make sure we don't miss? And in this week, we're talking about a really important one. It's the next generation. It's kids and teenagers in our lives, which for parents, that's pretty easy, right? You have kids or teenagers in your life. For those of you, some of you are grandparents and all that, but I know that some of you right now are thinking, oh, great. So glad I came to church. I'm not a parent. I'm not even married. I don't even like kids or whatever, wherever you're coming from. I mean, like, here I am, we're going to talk about parenting. But not so fast. Because once you decide to become a Christ follower, one of the things that you sign up for is the responsibility we have corporately to pass the faith on to the next generation. That's just not on the parents, that's on all of us. To do whatever we can to pass the faith on to the next generation, so that authentic spirituality, relationship with God, gets passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation. And that's on all of us to do that. And God has put kids in your life one way or another. And so go ahead, and it would be helpful to get them in your mind. Doesn't have to be your kid. I mean, if you're a parent, certainly get those kids in mind. But if you don't, get some other. And if you say, well, I don't have anybody, then maybe you need to consider changing that, getting involved in student ministry or children's ministry. But get some people involved as we look at, well, how do we do this? Because here's the really interesting thing. I've lived in North Dallas for 26 years now. And one thing I know, certainly for those who are parents, is that parents in North Dallas, by and large, really want to get parenting right. I mean, really want to get parenting right. I've lived here for 26 years. I don't think I've met one lazy parent. I really don't. I mean, I've been in other parts of the country, and I've met lazy parents who are kind of real laissez-faire, whatever happens, and they're not really, not here. I mean, on the scale of sort of laissez-faire to over the top, guess where North Dallas comes in? Okay, yeah, definitely on this side of the scale. Okay, they may even be over here somewhere. Because it's just the way we are. I mean, we're really into it, which is cool. But, it's like, man, whatever I can do for my kid, I'm going to do. So kids, it seems like, can't do anything just a little bit. So if they're playing sports, they're not sort of playing sports. I mean, you got professional coaches and all this kind of stuff, or dance or music or academics or anything. I mean, we really get into it. I know that firsthand because, my kids played hockey and select hockey at that. And when they started, I grew up playing hockey, so I was a house league hockey coach. And then when they got into select, I was demoted to an assistant coach, and then eventually demoted out of that too. But man, I remember as an assistant coach in a select hockey team, it's a dangerous place to be in between a hockey mom and what amount of playing time her kid her little Wayne Gretzky deserves. That's a tough place to be, a precarious place to be, because we're just kind of over the top. And we were right in there too. I remember like on the SAT thing, as our kids got older, and there was an SAT, process, or, this person that did this SAT class, and hard to get in, and real selective, and you have to know somebody, and pull strings, and political, and guess what? I was pulling string, maybe. I mean, I just, and I look back now and think, that's a little over the top. But at the time, it just made total sense. Now, I love the fact that parents are like, man, we're all in. But here's the ironic thing about that. And I'm speaking generally, okay, of us who are North Dallas parents. And that is, as we're so hyper about so many things and really want our kids to excel, it seems like the one area of life that I would argue is most important often is the one that gets pushed to the back burner. And that's the spiritual development of our kids. I mean, it's really interesting to me. But, because we're involved in so many stuff, and it's like that we're pretty, can be pretty laissez-faire about it. Well, hopefully that'll just happen. We're kind of, busy and doing all this stuff and don't really even think about that one much. But wouldn't we, most of us in this room at least, agree that if we're going to choose one thing that's most important in raising our kids, we'd say, and the kids in our life would say, man, it would be great if our kids could find God, fall in love with Jesus, live for him their whole life, fulfill the destiny that God has gifted them to do, and fully be the people that God has called them to be. Wouldn't we sign up for that? But it's just interesting how easy it is to push that to the back burner. So what we're going to talk about today is, hey, what if we took that one thing and put it on the front burner? Which means we may have to make some adjustments on the stove. But if we put this on the front burner, what would it look like? And so I want you to think about a kid in your life. If you're a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, friend, whatever, get a kid in your life, okay? And we're going to think about, well, what would it look like to pass the baton of faith and to help them become the people that God, would want them to be? And let me give you some encouragement too, because I know some people, you hear that, and it just freaks you out a little bit because you think, I'm not the person, I need to hire somebody who's religious or something. Let me help you out here. Number one, you are the perfect person for the kid in your life to pass this baton to. And here's why I know that. Because God is sovereign. He's in complete control, and he loves your child more than anybody else in the universe. He loves them so much, he gave them you to be involved in their life, however you're involved in their life. You're the perfect person for that. Secondly, you are not on your own. As we're going to see today, God tells us, here's what you do, and it's not rocket science. We're going to see that. You can do it. Not only that, God enables, he empowers, he gives us the wisdom and power that we need to do whatever he asks us to do. He's available, he's involved, he's engaged, he's the one that does the heavy lifting. He's the one that transforms lives, not us anyway. So he's there to help us do this. Not only that, you happen to be part of a church that really emphasizes next generation ministries, even increasingly so, to come alongside and help, as you'll hear today. So all those things, you're not on your own. Now, when we say to do this, before we look at how to do this, let me talk about what doing this is. Because it is not making your kids follow Jesus and fulfill their destiny and all that, because you can't. We can't. Our kids are going to grow up to become their own people. They're going to make their own decisions, and we can't control that. What we can do, what our job is to do everything we can to make it most likely that as they make those decisions, they'll choose to follow Christ. Or even if they walk away from that, eventually they might come around. And so how do we do that? And the Bible tells us. So today we're going to be in a really important passage in the Bible in Deuteronomy chapter 6. As you'll see today, I think it's one of the most important passages in the whole Bible. But if you're a Bible turner, you can turn there. Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy is the 5th book in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament. And what was going on in Deuteronomy in this chapter is Moses is preparing God's people, the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, to go into the promised land. And he's helping them understand, hey, this has got to be more than a one-generation thing. It's not just about you pursuing God. It's about you passing the baton of faith so that this happens from generation to generation to generation. And he talks about that, how to do that, in chapter 6, starting in verse 4. I'm going to read the whole passage, and then we'll talk about it. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. So he's talking about, man, how do we do this? How do we pass the baton of faith? And when you look at it real, just big picture, there's really two things. One is you develop it yourself so that then you can pass it on. And the first part is the only way you and I can pass on a love for God and serving his purposes is if we have it to pass on ourselves. And so let's talk about that part first. And that is the best thing we can do, the most important thing, is to develop our own authentic relationship with God. Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5, we just read it, but I'm going to key in on it, where he tells them, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. That verse right there is arguably the most important verse in the whole Old Testament. It's called the Shema, is what it was known as, which is Hebrew for to hear. These two verses would be memorized by every Israelite. It would have been the first verse that Jesus, as a young boy growing up, would have memorized. They would say it twice a day, every day. The first thing you did when you got up in the morning, before you did anything else, you would say the Shema, these verses in Hebrew. But Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, and just go on right through it. Before you went to bed that night, you would say the Shema. When Jesus was asked, in his ministry, what is the Old Testament law about? What's the most important thing in the whole Bible? You know what he said? The Shema, these verses. It was that important. And it was important not just to recite. It was a theological statement and a life commitment statement, a theological statement that said in a world which was their world of all these religions that had believed in many gods, that no, we're different. We believe in one God, the one true God, who's not some idol, he's real, and he created us. And then it was a statement of devotion, that I love him more than anything else in my life. That's my devotion. I love the Lord my God with all my heart and with all my soul, and with all my strength. That's what my life's about. And what Moses is saying is, that's great to recite, but if you're going to pass it on to your kids, it's got to be on your hearts. If it's not on your hearts, if you don't have it, you can't pass it. It's like a disease. Spirituality is more caught than taught. You can try to teach it. Well, do what I say, not what I do. It doesn't work that way. Spirituality is caught more than taught. It's kind of like a disease, I guess, that way. A contagion. This time of year, isn't it kind of fun with all the colds and flu and all that, spreading around everywhere? So just picture yourself, okay, maybe in the church lobby or in the lobby at your office building or store or wherever you work, hospital, and you see somebody across the space, a lobby space, let's say, that you haven't seen in a while, and you catch eye, so they're coming over to talk to you, and you notice on their way to you, they sneeze into their hand, kind of a, Now, I was curious about this last hour in the 9 o'clock service, so now I'm kind of curious about it now, because I'm a two sneezer. Like generally when I sneeze, almost always I sneeze twice. How many are two sneezers? Okay, how many of you are one sneezers? Okay, three sneezers. A lot more three sneezers than I thought there'd be. I don't know I guess you're really into it. You're competitive. I don't know. But so let's say they're a two sneezer or three sneezer, so on their way, and then they finally get to you and hold out their hand to shake. And there's a dilemma, right? What are you going to do? Because if it's your boss or a key customer or something like that, you may just have to take one for the team and pray that God will protect you. If it's somebody you know really well, you probably say, dude, I'm not shaking that snotty hand. Don't go sneezing and then hold it out there for me. Go wash your hand and maybe I'll think about it. But no, I'm not doing that. That's a disease we don't want to catch. It's a bad kind of contagion. But this is the opposite. It's a good kind of contagion. The only way you and I can pass on authentic spirituality is if we have it ourselves. And notice, I worded that really carefully, authentic. Because a lot of times people get freaked out as parents or grandparents, however you relate to a kid, because you think you got to be perfect. And you try to be. And you're so imperfect that you think, I'm going to ruin my kid. And you try to be perfect. And let me put you at ease. That nobody is. That can't work. And what you don't want to do is to try to pass on inauthentic spirituality to your kids. Like where you make yourself look better than you are. Because one of two things will happen. Either they'll reject the whole thing because of hypocrisy, or even worse, they'll buy into your perfectionism and inauthenticity and try to mimic that their whole life and live a very inauthentic shell of spirituality that's inwardly not even, and that perfectionism is a horrible thing to pass on and in spirituality. It's a hard thing to get over. And so don't do that. It's an authentic spirituality that says, hey, look, I'm a mess. I'm a mess. I'm such a mess that God had to come here in human flesh to save me, to rescue me. And he's still rescuing me because I'm still a mess. I'm a little less messy than I was at the beginning, but I'm on this journey with God. I make mistakes. When I do, I fall on God's grace because his grace is always there. And that real spirituality is not about my performance. Am I doing everything just right? It's about God it's about God's grace who pulls me toward himself. It's about his perfection on my account, not about my perfection. That's how I'm accepted. And then he grows me and changes me. And when I fall and come back to him, he even grows me in that process. So look, kid, I'm imperfect. I mess up. I'm going to be honest about that. I'm going to be teachable. I'm going to be open. God is there to, help me. That kind of spirituality is the kind that we'll take and that we want to pass on. And so we have to cultivate it ourselves. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that let's give ourselves to our relationship with God, as we've talked about already in this series, and develop the kind of faith that we can then pass on to our kids. Which leads me to the next point, and that is to pass on the faith to our kids. How do we do that? Like how do we do that? And Moses talked about it, verse 7 to 9. Impress them, these teachings, on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. He's just saying, make this a normal part of life. Get creative. Bring Jesus into your life. I mean, if he's the most important thing in your life, it should be pretty normal to have these conversations and talk about this. Don't make it a class. It's informal. Just talk about it. Just pass on the faith in everyday life. Which is cool how informal it is as it happens in the home. It's the most powerful place for this to happen. But in order for that to pull this off, what Moses is saying, there's two ingredients embedded in this. It's time and intentionality. Now, first of all, time. I mean, it takes time to do this. You have to be around. You have to be present. I mean, when he says, when they wake up and when you're putting them to bed, when you're walking along the road, which, now we drive. So when you're driving down the highway, when you're eating dinner together, then talk about these things and pass these on. But it assumes that you're actually there in those times, right? That there are times you're there when they wake up. And there are times you're there when they are going to bed and you have that opportunity, that you eat meals together, that you walk together, that you're with each other. There's no substitute for that kind of time. But it is really easy, certainly, and I talked about it last week, how, I messed up for a couple of years until Christy said, I'm not letting you do that anymore. You're not going to miss the life of your kids. You're going to be here more if you're going to be married to me, kind of a thing. And so I was like, well, all right. And I did. I'm really glad I did. There's a comedian named Jim Gaffigan. You heard of him? He's good. And he's on the scale of clean comedians to not clean. He's toward the clean scale. He's not Billy Graham. Okay, so he'll surprise you sometimes. And you're like, oh, Jim, come on. But he's not like somebody over here either, okay? And he's got 5 kids. So he talks about his kids a lot in his comedy. In fact, he's got a great statement about having 5 kids. He said, you know what it's like having 5 kids? Imagine you're drowning, and then someone hands you a baby. That's pretty good. So he wrote this book called Dad is Fat, which is a book that he wrote about parenting, actually, to his kids. And in there, he responds to critics of his who say, man, in your comedy, you always talk about parenting as if it's so terrible. It seems like you complain a lot, like you hate kids, and you make it sound bad. And so he responds to that in the book. And here's what he says. If you complain about how you spend your Saturdays taking your kid to birthday parties, well, that means you're taking your kid to birthday parties. If you complain how hard it is to get your kids to read, it means you're trying to get your kids to read. If you're complaining about your kid not helping around the house, well, that means you have a fat, lazy kid. You joke about it. That's how you deal. If parents don't like being a parent, they don't talk about being a parent. They're absent and probably out having a great time somewhere. There's sacrifice, right, to being there. And here's why it's so important, I think, to be there. Because kids are not always open to learning and growing and having these, significant conversations on our timetable. It's kind of on their timetable when they have a need to know or when they're open to talking. And you never know when that's going to be. I mean, when they're little bitty, it's a lot easier because they're kind of curious. They think you're a genius and all that. And so it's easier as you're driving to just have a conversation or as you're putting them to bed. But when they become teenagers, junior high, it's different, right? And then you just never know when they're going to be open to talking and when you can have a significant conversation. It's totally on their time frame. Because otherwise, if you try to have let's just tell you what, you act like you're a junior higher. You've just come home from school. Let's say I'm the parent and we're having this conversation. So, how was school today? Fine, yeah. What'd you learn? Nothing, yeah. Who did you talk to? Nobody, right? I mean, it's amazing what happens in school these days. Nothing and nobody. But then there are these other times. I call them magic moments. That's the way I started thinking about it as a parent, where for whatever reason, they just want to talk. I mean, about real stuff, like Mom, I want to talk. Like, you want what? Me? To me? You want your phone or what? To me? Or man, Dad, can we talk about it, right? And it's just time where for whatever reason, they're curious, they're open, there's a need to know, there's a crisis, there's a concern, or just curiosity, whatever. And if we're not there, then we miss them. It's kind of like the first week when we talked about those kairos moments that come and go. And man, you have to be there. Otherwise, you miss them. And when they're gone forever. So part of this is just time, being present. And then in addition to time is intentionality. It's not just hanging out with our kids. It's hanging out with our kids with a purpose. It's saying, okay, I want to pass on the faith and help my kids and kids in my life understand what it means to know and love Jesus if they want to make that choice and what it means to serve his purposes. Then we need to be intentional about that too. And there's certain conversations and all that to have. And that can be a little intimidating. You think, well, I don't know the ones to have. And I don't know all how do I have these kind of conversations or respond to these kind of questions? Or what are the conversations I should even be having? And here's where we as a church want to come alongside parents and grandparents and aunts, uncles, however you relate to a kid, want to come around that kind of intentionality and support it. And this is so cool. It's hard to explain how excited I am about this. But last year, we made a decision to launch a new initiative, which means hiring staff people and all kinds of stuff to do this. And that initiative is to come alongside parents, come alongside what happens in the home with greater intentionality and to help that happen. Also to help singles with life and dating and help marriages and all that too, but certainly parenting. And we hired a couple people, but David Monroe is the leader of this, who's new on our team. David, come on up. He's going to explain Home Life is the new initiative. And by the way, when he comes up and gets on camera, you're going to see this guy rocks the beard. Does he not?
Thanks.
I mean, really, if you're going to have a beard,
this is the one to have? All right, well, thanks.
I know, but tell us about Home Life.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me up here. This is our big kickoff day. We're really excited about it. And also thank you for, valuing family. I'm excited and proud to be a part of a church that values faith formation at home and family. So Jeff asked me just to share a little bit about what Home Life is. There's been a little bit, we gave you a preview a few months ago, but there's been some confusion about it. I'll tell you what it's not. It's not a series of classes or it's not a program of some kind. And it's not, somebody asked me just a couple weeks ago, is Home Life, are you gonna come into my home and evaluate my life? We do not want to do that. It is simply, it fits in really well with the series. It's simply a ministry for families, and we're trying to help you be more intentional at home, intentional in marriage, and intentional in parenting. There's lots of ways we're going to do that. We're kicking off the first phase of that today, and the first phase is putting a Home Life Resource Center in every one of our campuses. So if you didn't get a chance to see it on the way in, please stop by as you're leaving today, and it's going to be pretty crowded, but squeeze in there and grab some resources. If you can't do it today, do it next week. Here are some of the materials. I just brought a couple samples. These are called, you're going to see lots of these. These are called pointers, and they are life guides, just some simple information to help you through different life stages, maybe some life struggles that you might be in. And we're trying to cover the range, too. We've got stuff for singles all the way through empty nesters and grandparents. Then on the other side, you'll see lots of these, and these are what we're calling DIY cards, do-it-yourself cards. And this is the application side of that. In other words, we're giving you some simple tips, ideas, marriage date night ideas, family fun activities to do that build faith formation and increase, dialogue with your family. I'm excited about it. It's not designed to change you 180 degrees right off the bat. These are small, simple steps. We like to say we're trying to change the intentionality meter 2 degrees. Take a small step. We've also got some great books as resources. Most of them are recommended by our staff. Love for you to sit down and look through those books. We're asking you not take them. It's not a library, but please sit down and look through them and determine if it's something maybe you want to download and get for yourself. We're excited about. All the materials are also online. If you want to check them out online, we'd love for you to do that. There's one other phase that we're going to do a little bit later. I want to mention it really quickly because I know Jeff was very excited about this. We're going to do this a little bit down the road, launch this part probably in a late spring, early summer, but it's something we're calling Faith Path, and it's a birthday milestone initiative. And what we mean by that is we've earmarked some important birthdays between the ages of 0 and 18, and what we're going to do is we're going to send you some information. We're going to send you a letter saying, hey, listen, here's a kit with some simple faith formation resources for you so you can be more intentional around that life stage or that birthday. But today we're launching the Home Life Center. Love for you guys to stop by after service. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that. And like one of the age things, when they're real little, and here's this would be a great year to teach your child how to pray on their own and how to do that. And just all this stuff. So really cool. I so wish it had been there when I was raising my kids. Now my kids are ruined because I didn't have it. But no, they're doing fine. But it would have been really helpful. And we just kind of make it up as we went along. But this could be a great resource. The other thing, when we talk about coming alongside the next generation and parents that I want to really emphasize, is also how the church can aid and assist in this. And here I'm talking about Kids Zone and youth ministries. And like in Kids Zone, we put a lot of effort into Kids Zone because we want to provide an environment where kids can learn at their level, develop friendships with other kids, in their age group, small groups and all that, have people who are speaking of their, but basically have an environment that's just set for them that is really fun as well as impactful. And I won't talk about, I was going to talk about the experience I had growing up. I won't do that because it was mostly good and, now I have to. But I grew up thinking church was a little bit boring sometimes. And it was kind of hit or miss. And I had some times I thought it was awesome, sometimes. But I'm really glad that my children grew up in a place. As you can imagine, as pastors' kids, my kids were at church a lot. And they love church. And I'm really glad they do. And one of the big reasons they love church is growing up in Kids Zone, it was like their favorite hour of the week. And we work really hard. That team works really hard to make it that way. And so Kids Zone's important. But let me really talk about youth ministry and give an argument for this. And by the way, the church I grew up in did this really great. There's a trend that to me is a really disturbing trend in churches and in Christian families, and that is to de-emphasize youth ministry. From a church perspective, it's kind of a philosophy that says, this needs to happen in the home, so we're going to de-emphasize youth ministry. And from a parent perspective, I think largely it's just busy. We're just busy with all this other stuff. And here's why I think that's a really disturbing trend. Because in the faith formation of a human being, as they get older and they become more independent from parents, our ability to have as direct impact on our kids changes. Like, here's what I mean. When kids are a little bitty, as I alluded to earlier, they think you're the smartest person in the world, right? When kids are little, they think my dad's the strongest, my mom's the smartest, my parents are the coolest people ever, right? But then there comes a time, sometimes it's 11, 12, 13, 14, right? Where that changes drastically. And it's the opposite. Now the genius is an idiot, right? And who I thought was cool is actually a nerd. And they're such a nerd, they use words like nerd that people don't use anymore. And right? I mean, they're just out of touch or whatever. And this is natural, okay? It's just the way it is. Human beings develop independence from their parents and all that. It's not a bad thing. It's just the way it is. And there's this little dark period, from a parent perspective. And there are two influences that are even more significant, I think, parents are still obviously a big influence, but two that kind of take over for a little while. That's peers and other adults who serve as models and mentors. And by peers, of course, I mean friends. And youth ministry is built around those two things. It's built around developing friendships, peers with Christ followers, and who are those groups led by caring adults who serve as models and mentors. And, because people talk about peer pressure. Oh, peer pressure is bad. Be careful about peer pressure. Peer pressure is not bad. Peer pressure is awesome if you have the right peers, right? I mean, if you have the right friends, it's exactly what you want. That's how we're all like that. You don't have to be a teenager to we're all influenced by our friends. And that's why we're built around small group community. That's how we grow. Same thing with teenagers. And to make sure that, man, our kids, if they want to follow, if you're a teenager and you want to follow Christ, then get in a group of teenagers who want to follow Christ, right? I mean, that just makes sense. The other thing is young adults or adults who are not us, who can speak into the life of our students. Because even though we may say the same exact thing that other adult would say, you know what happens when that other adult says it? They actually think it's smart. And it can be frustrating for a parent because you're like, I've told you that 100 times. And they roll their eyes. Like, I told you that last week and you rolled your eyes. And then this guy says it and you think, you're ready to, make him president, because he said this great thing. But we don't have to be offended by that. That's just the way it is. That's not, but to not pay attention to it's the problem. And as a guy who did youth ministry around here in another church a long time, what would happen a lot is parents would not emphasize that when they're like 12, 13, 14. So like 17, 18 years old, they'd bring their kid in who got into some trouble, really far from God, and they're like, they come in your office and they sit down, they're like, here, fix him. I'm done. I don't know what to do with him or her or whatever. And the poor kid's looking at you like, please save me from these people, and it's just an awkward thing, and you do the best you can, and often actually things work out. It's better to do that than not. But I never said this. I always wanted to, just be mean because it's too late, but to say, well, where were you like 5 years ago? Because this could have been really different. No guarantees, but this could have been really different. If they'd established a peer group with young adults who serve as mentors and models, and this just could have been a lot different. And so let me really encourage you. And let me tell you from personal experience too, because this is a struggle even as parents. We get our kids so busy in so many things that it's easy to de-emphasize youth ministry, and I'm there. With my youngest, Caleb, he played select hockey, as I said earlier, and I loved him playing select hockey. I had a blast. I loved it. And we were traveling all the time and doing all this stuff all the time, which meant most of the time he couldn't go to youth group, and he tried to squeeze it in and do what he could and all that. And then going into his junior year of high school, he said, Dad, I don't want to do select hockey anymore. I just want to play for my high school team, but I want to do select hockey. I was like, well, why? He said, well, because I don't want to miss youth ministry. I want to be there. I want to actually show up most of the time to my small group, and I want to play in the youth band, and I want to, and you would have thought, I'm a pastor. Do you know that? And you would have thought I'd be like, yeah, but that's not where I went right away. I was like, no, you got to stay in high. It's like, really? You want to give up? And then you kind of hear yourself, and then you realize, that's really stupid. You got a kid saying, I want to follow Christ, be in a group. So I shifted fairly quickly, but even it took a little transition for me. It's just easy to kind of lose focus on this stuff. And so as much as possible, man, I'm just making an argument for youth ministry, okay? And it's why we pay a lot of attention to it around here at all of our campuses and have different youth buildings. I mean, it's a big deal to us for that reason. Also, before I leave this, if you're a young adult and you're wondering where to serve in ministry and you are a Christ follower, I mean, you're on the journey, and you generally like people younger than you. You're not like one of those people that's like, well, I'm going to show them who's boss or get them into shape. We don't want you. But if you're, really, we don't. But if you are, willing to come alongside people on their journey, and, even if you've made mistakes and all that, and you're willing to help other people learn from your mistakes, and you're kind of like that authentic thing we were talking about earlier, and you're wondering where to serve in ministry, youth ministry is a great place to do that as young, because you're still young enough to really be able to relate. You're still kind of cool, and you'll lose that in about 10 years. So take advantage of it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pray for the kids in our lives, because I think pretty much everybody in this room, even if you're not a Christ follower yet, would say, yeah, that spiritual thing's important. I mean, and certainly if you are a Christ follower, you say, there's a lot of things I could do with the kids in my life, but if I was going to have to pick one thing, if that one thing could be that they would know Jesus, fall in love with him, serve him their whole life, and fulfill his purposes that they've been created to fulfill, become the people God created them to become, I think I'd sign up. That would be the one thing. Okay, so what do we do? Well, first of all, as we've talked about, let's develop our own authentic relationship with God that's contagious. And then intentionally pass it on the way we've been talking about. And as a church, we're here to help that process too. And we're going to pray for that to happen. I also want to mention, I know some of us here in this room, you've got kids who are not following Christ at all. Some of you have teenagers or young adults or older adults, and they're pretty far from God and going down a trail that, it's not the one you would choose for them. And because that happens, right? And let me just say a word about that, because we're going to pray for those kids and young adults and adults. Back when I did youth ministry, I started doing youth ministry when I was 18. Just too young, but it's just the way it happened. And kids would go off path, and the parents would come freaked out. And I was 18 myself. And inside, I was freaking out too. I was thinking, oh no, they're never coming back. What's going to happen, On the outside, I couldn't say that. On the outside, I had to say, oh, they'll come back around. Try to be reassuring. But then I did youth ministry for a long time. And now I am very optimistic, authentically, in those conversations, because almost always they come back around. It just, a lot of times people on their journey, they'll have a harder time of it, and that's just something they need to do in their journey. And you know what? God redeems it and uses it. If you're one of those young people and you're in the middle of coming back to God, you think you've ruined your life or something, you haven't ruined anything. God is a redeemer. He's a restorer. You got a better story than the rest of us. Just let God use your story and be open to God and let him pull you back. So we're going to pray for those kids, but I want to encourage you, because I really am an optimist, having seen God just, do this over and over again over the years. So let's all pray together. Father, I pray that you would help us do our part. We can't make our kids and kids in our life do anything. They're going to make their own choices. But I would ask that you would help us to do our part faithfully, to do this one thing as well as we can by your help. First, you help us develop an authentic faith that's contagious and authentic, and then that you would help us then intentionally just be able to pass on the faith to our kids. And I pray for the kids in our church and represented in this room. Father, I pray that you would pull them to you There's so many influences in our culture that I pray that the Holy Spirit would be so influential in our homes and in our church that they would get it and they begin to serve you and live for you their whole life. And I pray for those kids and young adults and adults who may be far from you right now and off on a path that's not the best. Father, I pray you'd surround them with people that will help them see you. I pray that you would pull them to yourself. And as you do, that you would redeem their stories and make them even stronger spiritually than if all that had never happened, because that's what you do. And I pray that you would do that. In Jesus' name, amen.